For 10 years, she existed only as a body in a ravine. No name, no past, and no one looking for her. The ravine lay just beyond a dirt road that few people used by choice. In Yangyuan County, where the wind from the northern plateau never seemed to rest, the land was carved by erosion into deep, silent cuts. These were places shaped by time and abandonment, where sound traveled poorly and memory did not linger. On the morning of May 31st, 2010, that silence was broken. Road workers had been sent to level the ground near a wholesale vegetable market, a routine task in a region accustomed to rough terrain. From the edge of the road, one of them noticed something below the culvert, something out of place. The color was wrong, too bright against the dust and dry grass. At first glance, it appeared to be discarded clothing or construction waste. Then the shape resolved itself. Human proportions. Stillness. When they climbed down, the cold seemed to deepen. What lay before them was the body of a young woman, positioned in a way that felt deliberate. Her arms were folded across her chest, palms pressed together, resembling a gesture of prayer. Her legs were bound tightly, drawn inward with nylon rope. Over her head, someone had placed a cardboard box, secured with layers of transparent adhesive tape wrapped again and again around her face and neck. There was no blood, no visible wound. Only restraint, only suffocation. Police arrived within the hour and sealed the area. To experienced investigators, the scene spoke clearly. This was not where she had died. The ground showed no signs of struggle. No footprints led away. The road above was busy enough to erase tire marks within hours. Whoever left her here knew the terrain and trusted the land to keep a secret. The woman herself raised more questions than answers. She appeared to be between 25 and 35 years old. Her clothing was fashionable, almost striking in its contrast with the rural surroundings. A bright yellow padded jacket, slim dark pants, high-heeled shoes. Her hair had been dyed a chestnut blonde, her ears adorned with metal earrings that caught the light even now. This was not how local farm workers dressed in 2010. She had come from somewhere else. There were no identification documents, no phone, no wallet. Her pockets had been turned inside out. Whoever had taken her life had also taken her name. For investigators, the absence was suffocating in its own way. Without a name, there was no family to notify, no routine to reconstruct, no final hours to trace. Posters were printed. Notices were circulated. Faces were compared. None matched. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. As we examine this case, it is important to understand what makes it so unsettling. Violence did not erupt in public view. There was no weapon recovered, no dramatic confrontation witnessed by strangers. This crime unfolded quietly, built on proximity and trust. Someone convinced her to step into a vehicle. Someone decided that silence was safer than mercy. Stay with us. Because the most dangerous crimes do not announce themselves with chaos. They begin with familiarity, and they end where no one is watching. What investigators did not know yet was that the answer had been touching the victim's face the entire time. Part 1. The body tells a story. The first conclusion arrived not from instinct, but from absence. In the shallow ravine outside the vegetable market road, there were no torn plants, no churned soil, no long scrape marks that suggested a body had been dragged. The scene looked staged, not chaotic. Forensic technicians moved slowly around the remains, photographing angles, measuring distance, and collecting what little the wind and dust had not already claimed. This was not an act of sudden rage. It was a disposal, a decision made after something had already ended elsewhere. When the team approached the victim, the taped box drew immediate attention. It was not merely an attempt to conceal her face. The tape had been applied with patience, wrapped in tight, overlapping layers around the cardboard and down the neck. Each pass pulled taut. Each pass pressed into skin. It was a method that required proximity and control. It also required time. The medical examiner began the work that investigators always dread and depend on. Scissors cut through the adhesive in careful strips. The tape resisted at first, as if it still held authority over the body beneath it. When the cardboard box was lifted away, the victim's face emerged gradually, softened by early decomposition, but still recognizable in structure. The skin tone had shifted. The lips were swollen. Yet her features remained clear enough to tell a story that the living had refused to claim. She was female, estimated between 25 and 35 years old, approximately 160 centimeters in height. The timeline was narrow. Based on condition and temperature, death had likely occurred about 5 days before discovery, placing it in late May of 2010. Then the cause: mechanical asphyxiation. Not a blade. Not a bullet. Not blunt trauma. The airway had been sealed by design. The tape and the cardboard had not merely muffled sound. They had eliminated breathing. In cases like this, the violence is intimate. The killer does not strike from a distance. The killer stays close, controlling the victim's body until it stops resisting. The examination found no catastrophic injury, no deep cuts, no fractures beyond a minor break to an index finger, an injury consistent with brief, desperate resistance or an impact during transport. There were no indications of sexual assault. That absence did not comfort anyone. It simply narrowed the motive. The victim had been restrained, searched, and removed from the world. Whatever the primary objective had been, it did not require prolonged contact after the point of control. Her clothing, however, demanded attention. The bright yellow padded jacket was not a practical choice for rural labor. The high heels made no sense for dirt roads and market work. Her earrings, metallic and reflective, suggested a level of self-presentation more typical of urban service jobs than a farming community. She was dressed for visibility, yet she had been discarded where visibility died. Her pockets had been turned out. No identification. No money. No phone. That detail mattered because it pointed to intention beyond killing. It pointed to erasure. Someone wanted her to remain unknown. Someone wanted the investigation to begin in darkness and stay there. Still, the terrain told investigators something else. Tire marks on the road were useless. Trucks moved through the area daily, leaving overlapping impressions that blurred into one another. If a vehicle had stopped near the ravine, it would vanish into the routine traffic in a matter of hours. And the body's placement below the culvert suggested a method. A vehicle could have approached close to the edge. A person could have lifted and thrown the victim down. There was no need to drag her across the ground. There was no need to struggle at the site. That is why the investigators did not treat the ravine as the beginning. They treated it as the end of a chain. We should pause here because this is where many investigations fail without anyone noticing. If the body is not killed at the location where it is found, then the killer has already gained an advantage. The evidence is split across places. Witnesses belong to another town. Surveillance, if it exists at all, belongs to another street. And the clock does not stop simply because the victim's name is missing. Yet there was one category of evidence that often survives when everything else is stripped away. Contact. The tape had been handled, torn, pressed, smoothed. Whoever applied it almost certainly used bare hands. Sweat and skin oils cling to adhesive in a way the wind cannot erase. Even if the killer believed the countryside would swallow the crime, the tape could remember. Technicians spent hours processing the strips. Powder. Chemical treatment. Light and angle. Gradually, ridges surfaced like faint maps. 9 separate fingerprints were recovered from the adhesive. 7 were clear enough for comparison. To investigators, those prints were not simply marks. They were promises. Because in the end, a fingerprint does not lie. It does not negotiate. It does not forget. And at this stage, the team made a critical inference from the totality of the scene. This crime was unlikely to have been committed by a single person acting alone. The evidence suggested a vehicle, a controlled transport, and a body placed with efficiency, which meant the ravine was not a crime scene. It was a dumping ground, and it strongly suggested that at least 2 people had been involved. Part 2. 10 years of silence. Once the body was removed from the ravine, the investigation entered its most dangerous phase. Not because of what investigators knew, but because of what they did not. Without a name, the woman could not be placed within any social structure. There was no missing person report to match, no employer to question, no family waiting anxiously by a phone. Her existence, as far as official records were concerned, began and ended in that shallow cut of land outside Yangyuan County. The first strategy was simple and exhaustive. Notices were distributed across neighboring towns and counties. Photographs of the victim's clothing and reconstructed facial features appeared on bulletin boards, local broadcasts, and police circulars. Officers visited villages and factories, asking the same questions again and again. Had anyone seen her? Had anyone heard of a woman who vanished in late May? No one came forward. The silence was not hostile. It was indifferent. People looked at the images, shook their heads, and returned to their routines. In regions where transient labor was common, disappearance did not always register as an emergency. People moved on. People drifted. People vanished without ceremony. That assumption worked against her. Investigators attempted a different approach. They examined recent crimes with similar characteristics. Across the provincial border in Shaanxi, a robbery-murder ring had been dismantled. The group had targeted women, luring them into vehicles, stealing their possessions, and abandoning their bodies in remote locations. The parallels were unsettling. Vehicle use, isolation, erasure. For a brief moment, the case felt alive again. Officers traveled to coordinate with Shaanxi authorities. They compared methods, timelines, and physical evidence. A primary suspect, already in custody for multiple violent crimes, appeared promising. His record fit the profile. His confession history was extensive. If he had operated in Yangyuan, the mystery might finally collapse. Fingerprint comparisons were run. None matched. The relief was short-lived and cruel. One door closed. Another hallway of darkness opened. Then came the near miss that investigators would later describe as the most painful moment of the case. A report arrived from Inner Mongolia. A missing woman, described as a matchmaker, bore striking physical similarities to the victim. Petite frame, dyed blonde hair, fashionable clothing. The resemblance was strong enough to reignite hope. Officers traveled hundreds of kilometers to verify the lead. They entered a modest home and found the woman alive, seated at the family table. She had not been murdered. She had simply left home during a period of personal conflict and later returned. The similarity had been coincidence. Another illusion. Another dead end. As months turned into years, the case changed shape. It was no longer a pursuit. It became a weight. Files thickened. Evidence was catalogued, recatalogued, and stored. The fingerprints remained preserved, silent, waiting for a name to attach themselves to. Investigators rotated out. Some retired. Some transferred. But the case did not leave with them. It stayed, unfinished, occupying the back of their minds. We should acknowledge something uncomfortable here. Time does not pressure criminals equally. It erodes memory. It dulls urgency. It teaches people how to forget. For 10 years, the woman in the ravine was not discussed in public. There were no anniversaries, no memorials, only paperwork and quiet frustration. During that decade, the men responsible lived ordinary lives. They worked. They slept. They aged. The absence of consequence began to resemble absolution. But science does not age the way people do. In 2019, a nationwide initiative was launched to re-examine unresolved cases. Investigators were encouraged to abandon assumptions and start smaller. Not farther. Not broader. Closer. The Yang Yuan team returned to the beginning, not geographically, but socially. They asked a different question. Not who would recognize her face from a poster, but who might remember her presence without knowing her name. That shift led them to a roadside restaurant in Zhuolu County. The owner studied the photograph for a long time. His hesitation was not denial. It was memory working its way back to the surface. The yellow jacket, the earrings, the posture. Finally, he spoke. He believed she had once worked there, years earlier. A server, quiet, temporary, someone who did not stay long enough to leave records behind. For the first time in a decade, the woman in the ravine began to re-enter the world of the living. And with that re-entry came something far more dangerous than silence. The investigation had finally found a place where the victim had been seen alive. What investigators did not yet know was that this place would lead directly to the men who put her in the ravine. Part 3. The fingerprints, remember. The restaurant was not remarkable. That, in retrospect, was precisely why it mattered. It stood near the roadside, serving drivers and transient workers who passed through without leaving traces. Employment records were informal. Names were exchanged casually. Faces were remembered longer than documents. When investigators returned with the photograph, they did not expect certainty. They expected doubt. Instead, they were met with recognition. The owner studied the image again, slower this time. The bright yellow jacket, the earrings, the posture that suggested guarded politeness. He recalled her working there briefly, nearly a decade earlier. She had not spoken much. She had not stayed long. He could not remember her full name. Only a nickname, a sound that lingered imperfectly in memory. That was enough. From there, the search narrowed. Linguistic hints led investigators toward Huailai County. Villages were visited. Families were questioned. Eventually, in a modest home, a younger sister broke down when she saw the photograph of the jacket and the earrings. She did not need a face reconstruction. She recognized the belongings. The woman in the ravine finally had a name, Anxiangqin. She had been married. The marriage had been unhappy. She worked intermittently, staying with friends, moving between towns, sending money home when she could. When she disappeared in 2010, her family assumed she had chosen distance over conflict. No report had been filed. Silence had been misinterpreted as independence. DNA testing confirmed what grief already knew. With identity came history. With history came connections, and one connection surfaced almost immediately. On the last evening she was seen at the restaurant, An Xiangqin had received a phone call. She had left early. She told the owner someone was coming to pick her up. A red pickup truck. The detail was not dramatic. It did not feel decisive. But it was specific. Investigators began reviewing vehicle registrations from surrounding counties, focusing on small red trucks that had changed ownership since 2010. Hundreds became dozens. Dozens became one. The truck had belonged to a man named Huang Libing. His background raised questions quickly. He had operated a coal business that collapsed under debt. Financial records showed pressure. Desperation. At the time of An Xiangqin's disappearance, he had been closely associated with another man, Qi Chengyu. More critically, Huang's girlfriend had once shared an apartment with the victim. Opportunity did not announce itself loudly. It simply aligned. Huang Libing had access. He had motive. He had a vehicle. But suspicion alone does not survive in court. Investigators needed something that time could not erode. They returned to the evidence room. The adhesive tape was retrieved, preserved exactly as it had been a decade earlier. 9 fingerprints. 7 viable. Huang Libing's prints, stored from prior traffic violations, were entered for comparison. The process was routine. The atmosphere was not. No one spoke as the software completed its analysis. Then the screen changed. 2 matches. The left index finger. The right middle finger. In that moment, the case ceased to be historical. It became immediate. A warrant was prepared that night. Officers moved quietly. When they entered Huang Libing's home in Zhuolu County, he was asleep. He did not resist. He did not ask why. In the interrogation room, under flat light and unyielding silence, Huang attempted denial out of habit more than conviction. He claimed not to know An Xiangqin. He spoke of business, of routine, of being mistaken. The performance collapsed quickly. When investigators placed the fingerprint images on the table, enlarged and undeniable, Huang's body betrayed him before his words could. His shoulders sagged. His breathing changed. The room waited. He asked for a cigarette. What followed was not an explosion of confession, but a controlled release. Debt. A failed business. A scheme promising fast returns. A need for money that eclipsed restraint. He admitted that he and Qi Chengyu had planned to borrow from An Xiangqin. If she refused, they would take it. The tools had been prepared in advance. Tape. Rope. The box. He insisted he had not intended to kill her. The words sounded rehearsed. The explanation did not matter. The tape had not cared about intention. Qi Chengyu, he said, had died in a traffic accident 2 years after the crime. The partner who had helped restrain her would never stand trial. The burden would rest with the one still breathing. As we examine this moment, it is important to understand what truly ended the decade of silence. It was not confession. It was not memory. It was not even persistence. It was contact. A fingerprint does not fade when guilt learns to sleep. It waits. When confronted with the evidence, the man did not scream. He simply collapsed. Confessions rarely arrive the way people imagine. There was no dramatic outburst, no desperate plea for forgiveness. When Huang Libing finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate, shaped more by exhaustion than remorse. 10 years of concealment had not hardened him. It had worn him down. He described the collapse of his coal business in simple terms. Losses accumulated faster than explanations. Creditors called daily. Sleep became fragmented. Every conversation turned into an accounting of debt. When an opportunity appeared, disguised as a high-yield investment scheme, he clung to it with the desperation of someone already drowning. The entry fee was not large by objective standards, but to men already buried in obligation, it might as well have been unreachable. And Xiangqin became a solution not because she was weak, but because she was familiar. She shared space with his girlfriend. She had worked steadily. She lived carefully. In Huang's mind, that caution translated into savings. The plan, he claimed, had been simple. Ask for money. If refused, take it. Violence was not framed as a goal, only as a contingency. That distinction did not survive scrutiny. He admitted that tape, rope, and restraints had been prepared before the meeting. He admitted that the vehicle had been chosen deliberately. He admitted that once An Xiangqin was inside the truck, there was no intention of letting her leave freely. What he resisted admitting was foresight. He spoke as if events had unfolded independently of his choices. The box, he said, was meant to silence her. The tape was meant to keep her quiet. The words, "I did not know," appeared repeatedly in his statement. He did not know the tape would seal her airway completely. He did not know she would stop breathing. He did not know how quickly panic could become fatal. What he never said was that he stopped. By the time the truck reached the isolated roadside in Yangyuan County, An Xiangqin was already dead. Her body was disposed of without ceremony. Huang described the act as efficient. There was no prayer. No hesitation. The ravine was chosen because it was forgettable. For a decade, it was. Qi Chengyu, the accomplice, never faced interrogation. 2 years after the crime, he died in a traffic accident in Inner Mongolia. There would be no shared accountability, no confrontation. Only one man remained to carry the full weight of a crime committed by more than one set of hands. The trial took place in May 2021 at the Intermediate People's Court of Zhangjiakou. It was not theatrical. It was procedural. Prosecutors rejected Huang's claim of accidental death. They argued that any adult of sound mind must understand the consequences of sealing a person's mouth and nose with adhesive tape for an extended period. Intent, they asserted, did not require desire. It required acceptance. The court agreed. Huang Libing was sentenced to life imprisonment, with permanent deprivation of political rights. Financial compensation was ordered for the victim's family, though no sum could reconstruct 10 years of absence. Qi Chengyu's case was formally closed due to death, leaving only a footnote where a second verdict should have been. For An Xiangqin's family, the conclusion arrived too late to feel complete. They received her remains long after hope had decayed into resignation. There were no last conversations to revisit, no warnings to reinterpret. Only the knowledge that her disappearance had not been voluntary, and that her silence had not been chosen. As we step back from this case, the lesson resists simplicity. This was not a crime born of spectacle. There was no dramatic weapon, no sudden eruption of rage. It was built quietly, from debt, entitlement, and the belief that another person's life could be treated as collateral. The ravine did not remember her. The tape did. And while 10 years passed without answers, one truth remained unchanged. The human body does not forget contact. It records it. It waits. And eventually it speaks. For 10 years, she had no voice. But the fingerprints never forgot.